All right, so draft night wrapped up for the Wizards. Now, I am recording this before they pick at number 26 overall, but essentially their two biggest picks of the night have already happened. They picked Alexandre Sarr at number 2, and they went and made a huge trade, sending Deni Avdija over to the Trailblazers in exchange for that 14th pick, and they got a really, really good pick at number 14, a really good guard from Pittsburgh. But the biggest news of the night, obviously, for the Wizards is the point that they traded away Deni Avdija. And I understand some of the disappointment. I feel like Wizards fans right now are pretty torn on it. So there's one side of the fence where people are like, Denny's a former lottery pick who just started really hitting his stride. He was amazing last season, grew in many different areas of the game. Why trade him away, right? You get a player in the lottery for him to develop, and he looks like he's near the peak of his development. Why move him away? Right? Why move him when he's just starting to get some momentum? There's another side of the fence where people are like, the Wizards have a lot of wings, right? So if they didn't move away from that, they'd be looking at having Kyle Kuzma, Koulibaly, Avdija, right? They're really, really stacked when it comes to wings. With having that, it's tough for certain guys to develop, right? And so I think that's what the Avdija move was about, was maybe opening up some opportunities for Koulibaly, right? His usage wasn't that crazy last season as a lottery pick. A lot of times he was kind of relegated to like just sitting out there on the perimeter to kind of catch and shoot roles and duties at times. This frees up some space for him to develop, right? And that's not taking away from anything Deni did. I understood why Wizards fans and Reddit or social media in general were disappointed. And I get both perspectives, but I do think this is good for allowing Koulibaly to develop a bit more. He's a lottery pick. Picked him very high in the draft last season, allow him to grow into the type of player that he needs to be. Now, it's also going to come with trading away some other guys. There are some vets on this team that are kind of holding up spots that will be better off being somewhere else. Another name I'm thinking about is Kyle Kuzma. I think Kyle Kuzma is a good player, but I think he'd be better off somewhere else. Again, trading away a veteran who's just kind of sitting up here taking up a lot of shots while you're not winning, when you could move him away for more assets while allowing your younger guys to develop. So I think Deni was the first step to allowing some of those younger wings out there to develop and grow, right? So that's my perspective on moving away Deni for that 14th pick, which turned out to be a really, really good player who'll probably come off the bench, but still, right? I understand both sides of the fence. I understand the disappointment, but again, it seemed to be about allowing guys like Koulibaly to develop a little bit more and opening up the floor for him. So that's the thing about moving away Deni Avdija. As far as picking Alex Sarr at number 2, I think Alex Sarr is the best player in this class. Now, you can say what you want to say this is a weak class, right? It's the worst class we've seen in years, whatever the case may be. Still, the Wizards got the best player in this class. Zachary Ricochet is not the best player in the class. He's a really good player. Maybe he made more sense for the Hawks in their situation, but Alex Sarr has the most upside, in my opinion. A really, really good defensive big guy who can play and drop, elite level rim protector, great athlete around the rim, does a great job at finishing plays, does have a lot of jump shooting upside and potential, can run the floor. So it really helped this team from a pace standpoint. He's the most talented player in the class, and they picked him. And I really like what they're doing right now. It looks like they're slowly starting to develop a little bit of a defensive identity. Like I said, look at their last 2 drafts during the start of this post-Bradley Beal rebuild. Like I said last year, went and picked up Bilal Koulibaly, whose best trait is his defense. Now you pick up Alex Sarr, whose best trait is his defense to go along with his athleticism and things like that. We've seen a couple of young rebuilding teams kind of take that approach, right, where they're focusing on building a really strong defensive culture throughout their rebuild. Good example of that, the Orlando Magic. They were able to get into the playoffs and be one of the best teams in the East strictly off of their ability to defend at a very high level. I'm not saying the Wizards are doing that exact same thing, but it looks like it, right? Their focus the last 2 drafts has been picking a really good defensive player with those high picks. I like that. I like it a lot. And so there's a lot of excitement to be had right now for Wizards fans. I really think their GMs have done a general good job these first couple of years of this rebuild. There are a lot of complaints, right? A lot of questions about what they're doing, right? People, like I said, seem really torn on how the Wizards are doing so far through this first couple of years in this post-Bradley Beal era. I'm going to say this, right? This is a really good time to be excited about a rebuild. Look at the scope of the league. The last 4 titles have been won by teams that developed a core from top to bottom. Look at the Milwaukee Bucks. They won it in 2021. And that was essentially a team led by Giannis Antetokounmpo and Chris Middleton. Yes, Drew Holiday was added, but that duo, that core of those 2 guys was built from the NBA draft. The Boston Celtics this year, right? Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, they were built up from the NBA draft. 2022, the Golden State Warriors, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, and Stephen Curry built up from the NBA draft and developed a ton of chemistry amongst themselves over the years. Even look at the Nuggets back in 2023, right? They got some really good pieces outside of Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray, but those two guys, that duo, built from the ground up. This is a time to be excited about a rebuild because right now, with the league being so wide open, there being no favorite right now to win titles, what we're seeing is those teams that are taking time to develop something from the ground up. It's working, right? This isn't a league where the super teams are winning. That's not working. That's seen as, a recipe for disaster more than being a recipe for success. Look at the Suns. Look at how the Nets turned out a couple of years ago. This is a good time to have a team that you favor that's rebuilding, because rebuilding teams or teams that are building from the ground up, those are becoming very successful. Talk about some of the teams that we're really excited about going into next season. The Thunder, built from the rebuild position and, from the ground up. Think about also the Orlando Magic, like I mentioned earlier, they built their thing from the ground up. And I think next year they're going to be really, really good. And they're just going to continue to get better. So that's why it's an exciting time to be a fan of a team that's rebuilding, right? And also on top of that, the Wizards don't have to have everything figured out this particular draft, right? So I'm seeing, again, people on Wizards Reddit or Wizards social media critiquing stuff here and there. They don't have to have everything figured out just this particular draft. As I mentioned earlier, this is year 2 of a complete rebuild. You get good pieces to develop this year, see where you're at, and anticipate picking really high in what will be a more talented class next year. Point blank, period, right? So we don't have to have every single thing figured out here. This season is about developing the pieces we already have, making space for those pieces to develop and working on those guys and allowing them to grow, right? So like I said, what we had last season was year 1 of a rebuild with solid draft positioning. What we have this year is year 2 of a rebuild with really, really good draft positioning, with having the 2nd pick and the 14th pick. And what we'll have next year is a year 3 of a rebuild with really, really good draft positioning as well. So I think, generally speaking, if we're looking at things, this Wizards front office is doing a solid job with where things are right now. And there are also some tradable assets that are still on this team. Kyle Kuzma, right? There's still Malcolm Brogdon. He has an expiring contract. Maybe they can shop him off somewhere this offseason. He's of value since he has an expiring contract, and maybe get some assets back for him. Jordan Poole, maybe at some point in time, ups his value to become tradable down the road, right? There are still tradable pieces on this Wizards team. What if you sign and trade Tyus Jones somewhere and get some pieces back for him? So they still have assets, right? So it's not like they're in the gutter or anything. I think generally this Wizards front office has done a good enough job. As I said, they've established kind of a culture through those last couple of drafts in picking defensive-minded players. They're going to build from there. I like what they've done. I'm really excited to see how things turn out for them this season. As I mentioned, they have the 26th pick, and we'll see who they pick from there. But I think generally they have done a great job. I don't think there's too much to be worried about for Wizards fans. Be happy that you came out with 2 really good lottery picks. You came out with the best player in the class in Alex Sarr, and they're just going to continue to get better and build off of what they already have. They have a new culture, a new team identity. So we'll see what ends up happening. But I think generally this Wizards team, as I said, have done an amazing job to get things started in this post-Bradley Beal era.